Nobody outside that room was supposed to know this. It's the spring of 2013, in a nondescript office building in Honolulu, Hawaii. A 30-year-old man sits behind a government contractor's badge, watching numbers scroll across a screen that most Americans will never see. His name is Edward Snowden, and in a few short weeks, he is going to do something that no one in that building, no one in Washington, and no one in the highest levels of the American intelligence community will see coming. He is going to walk out the door with the truth. For years, the National Security Agency had built something enormous in the shadows, a surveillance apparatus so vast it could reach into the phone records of ordinary Americans, into their emails, into the very fabric of the internet itself. All in the name of national security, all justified quietly. In classified courtrooms most citizens didn't even know existed. This is the moment the story starts to unravel. Snowden wasn't some outsider looking in. He was inside the machine. A systems administrator with access most people in the intelligence community could only dream of. The kind of access that lets a person see not just pieces of the puzzle, but the whole picture. And what he saw disturbed him enough to risk everything. Here's the part they left out of the official report. The programs Snowden would soon expose had names that sounded almost bureaucratic. Prism, Boundless Informant, Upstream Collection. But behind those names was something the American public had never fully grasped. The idea that the government could, in theory, sweep up the communications of millions of its own citizens without them ever knowing, without a warrant tailored to them individually, all under legal authorities passed in the anxious years after September 11th. Somewhere in Washington, someone made a call they'd regret. By late May, Snowden had already made his decision. He packed a bag, told his employer he needed medical leave, and boarded a flight to Hong Kong, as far from Washington's reach as he could get, while still being able to talk to journalists he trusted. He carried with him thousands of classified documents. Not printed, not photographed in some dead-drop thriller fashion. Encrypted, digital, and dangerous in a way paper never could be. The paperwork was clean. The truth wasn't. In a Hong Kong hotel room, Snowden met with journalists Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras. Over the course of several tense days, he explained what he had taken, why he had taken it, and what it meant. He wasn't looking for money. He wasn't looking for a foreign government to reward him. He said on camera that he wanted the public to decide for themselves whether this kind of surveillance was something they could accept. What you're about to hear never made it to the evening news. Not at first, because for a few critical days in early June 2013, almost nobody in America knew what was coming. Then, on June 5th, The Guardian published the first story. A secret court order had compelled Verizon to hand over the phone records of millions of Americans, who called whom, when, and for how long. It wasn't content. It was metadata, but metadata, intelligence experts would later admit, can tell you almost everything about a person's life. The next day, a second story broke. Prism, a program that gave the NSA direct access to the servers of major American tech companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and others. The tech giants would spend weeks afterward insisting they hadn't handed over a back door, that everything had gone through proper legal channels. But the damage to public trust was already spreading like a crack through glass. Ask yourself, who benefits from you not knowing this? Within days, Snowden's name and face were public. He had asked to be identified, rather than let suspicion fall on his colleagues. And almost instantly, he became one of the most polarizing figures in modern American history. To some, he was a traitor who had handed adversaries a blueprint of American intelligence capability. To others, he was exactly what the founders had in mind when they wrote protections against government overreach into the Constitution, a citizen willing to sacrifice everything to expose it. The Justice Department moved fast. Within weeks, Snowden was charged under the Espionage Act, a law originally written in 1917. In a world that had never imagined satellites, servers, or a single laptop capable of carrying the country's deepest secrets, his passport was revoked while he was mid-flight, stranded first in Hong Kong, and then, of all places, in the transit zone of a Moscow airport, unable to legally enter Russia and unable to leave. This wasn't supposed to leave that building. For 39 days, Snowden lived in the legal no-man's land of Sheremetyevo International Airport, while governments around the world debated what to do with him. Ecuador considered asylum. Other nations quietly declined, unwilling to provoke Washington. Eventually, Russia granted him temporary asylum, a decision that would tie his name to Moscow for the rest of the story, fueling accusations that would follow him for years. Was this simply a whistleblower seeking safety, or had he become something else entirely? A man whose freedom now depended on the goodwill of a government America viewed as an adversary. Back home, the fallout was just beginning. Congress held hearings. Intelligence officials who had previously told lawmakers under oath that the NSA did not collect data on millions of Americans were suddenly facing hard questions about whether they had misled the public or the Senate itself. President Obama, defending the programs as legal and essential to preventing terrorism, was also forced to acknowledge that the debate Snowden had ignited was one the country needed to have. History remembers the outcome. It forgot how close it came to going the other way, because for years, these programs had operated with almost no public scrutiny. If Snowden hadn't walked out of that building in Hawaii with a hard drive full of secrets, it's entirely possible the American public would never have learned the scope of what had been built in their name, funded by their taxes, justified by a war on terror that had, by 2013, been running for over a decade. The revelations kept coming throughout the summer and into the fall, story after story, program after program. X-keyscore, which allowed analysts to search nearly anything a person did on the internet. Details about how the NSA had reportedly monitored the communications of allied world leaders, including Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel, straining diplomatic relationships that took years to repair. Each new document felt like another piece of a picture Americans hadn't been allowed to see. The record was sealed for a reason, and yet out of the fallout came something few people expected: actual change. In 2015, Congress passed the USA Freedom Act, reforming the bulk telephone metadata program that had started the entire firestorm. It was one of the first major legislative reversals of post-9/11 surveillance authority in over a decade, a direct, traceable consequence of what one contractor had chosen to reveal. But by then, the personal cost to Snowden was already locked in. No pardon, no safe return home, a life lived in exile, in a country the United States viewed with deep suspicion, all because he believed the American people had a right to know what was being done in the name of their safety. To this day, the argument over Edward Snowden hasn't settled. Some intelligence officials maintain that his leaks caused genuine, lasting damage to national security, exposing methods and sources that adversaries could exploit. Others argue that the true damage was already done, not by the leak, but by the surveillance itself, and that Snowden simply forced a conversation the government had spent years trying to avoid. What's rarely disputed is this: for a few weeks in the summer of 2013, one man's decision changed how an entire nation understood its own government. It forced Americans to ask a question that doesn't have a comfortable answer. How much of your privacy are you willing to trade for the promise of safety when you never got to vote on the trade in the first place? Somewhere in Washington, that question is still being asked. And somewhere in Russia, the man who forced it into the open is still waiting to see if he'll ever be allowed to come home.